Hi, welcome to Grafted, Jewish Roots of Christianity, and I'm your host, Stephanie Pavlantos. Thank you for joining me, and today my guest is Kayte Abaffy. Thank you, Kayte, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk to you again. It's been a little while.
I had you and Luke on probably over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So this time I thought it'd be fun just to be able to talk to you, because I know you had two little boys at that time, and you go kind of running back and forth trying to take care of little boys. And so now I think you have
I've got
house.
three.
Yeah, you have three.
Girl now too, yeah.
Yeah. But the boys with grandma, is that what?
Yes. The boys have a play date on Tuesdays with Luke's mom and then their other little cousin, and they just play all day and run around on the farm and Legos and Nerf bullets.
Well, that's good. That's really good for little boys, especially. They need that running time and playing time. Yeah. I always appreciated. We have 4 acres, and that our children could run around the property and run up and down the driveway, whatever, So I know
being outside is a big deal. It's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's good for them. It's really good for them. Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about Kayte. So she calls herself an accidental documentary producer, and I'm going to let her explain what that means. She's a food enthusiast and a former TV actor. She works with her journalist husband, Luke, and together they created the Way documentary. And I think you were the producer for the Way and for the Christmas Question documentary.
Yeah.
And that was with, if you're familiar with 119 Ministries, that was with them as well, or on them. And The Truth, Reformation 2.0, which we actually talked about the last time they were guests. Reformation 2.0 is the apologetics book for the Torah observant believers. And now they've launched The Life, which is a weekly lifestyle podcast, also for the Torah community and anyone, because they have great guests on there and they talk about a variety of different things. So she has 3 children, and they have an off-grid tiny house on their homestead in part. And we were just talking about that because she just got 4 sheep. So we were talking about that a little bit. So that's exciting. Homesteads are kind of getting really popular, I think.
So you have your own little oasis. I love it.
So this is what I was talking about here for those YouTube who can see this. This wasn't the first thing you put out. You put out the book first, and then
that was the first. So the Way documentary. Yeah, and it's funny. We kind of went in order. It's like The Way, The Truth.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes sense.
We didn't plan it like that though, but it ended up unfolding that way, which is interesting. When you wrap up a project, we don't kind of ever know what the next one's going to be necessarily. So that has been really cool to see it that way.
Yeah, and this is, the subtitle is Leaving Churchianity to Live Like the Savior. So this is a DVD project. And so lots of interviews, lots of people. And it was funny because there were people on here that I used to follow and listen to and go to their websites, never realizing who I was actually, like, what it was all about. Like, I just loved their information. I loved what they taught, and didn't really realize that they were Torah observant until I saw some of them on that. So it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, now that makes sense.
That's happening to me too, actually, Stephanie. On YouTube, there just have been different moms I watch, or people who talk about business or this or that, homesteaders. And then after watching like a bunch of their videos, I'll find like, and here's how our family prepares for Shabbat. And I'm like, oh, you do that? It's just, it's happening more and more. It's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's cool because I think the Lord is just revealing his Torah to people, and that it's not a burden. It wasn't done away with. And it's meant to, I don't know, it's probably the wrong word, but I kind of think of it as enhancing our relationship with the Lord, not making it a burden and bringing it down. It's really enhancing and being able, and again, we'd say over and over, it's not a salvation issue. We're only saved through the blood of Yeshua, but this is how we live out our life with him, obey him, and love him. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it's not a burden, but I think that we're just taught that it is, because that's not even scriptural. Jesus is very vocal about the fact that his burden is light, and I've actually heard that to mean that he's talking, it's like a idiom, and he's actually talking about his law. His law is light. So I think it's interesting. We're just kind of programmed into thinking that it's a burden, and that's what it's always been, a burden. So
yes, I remember when Luke and I, my husband and I, started diving into the Torah more and learning more about these laws and the goodness of these laws. I was struck by, I grew up in a Christian family, like strong believer parents, Christian school, like excellent education, all the theology and stuff like that. But I was really shocked when I kept reading in the Torah, do these things for your good always. I'm like, well, that's slightly different than what I remember. I thought we were supposed to do them so we could realize that we couldn't keep them and that we needed Yeshua. Right. And that happens too. You understand your sin. But when the heart behind the giving of them was this blessing that I got from a parent saying, like, I want things to go well for you, and so do these things. And just over and over that was repeated. And I thought, okay, that's a little different than the messaging that we're getting about the instructions. And there's so much goodness to be had. Luke kept asking me when I was kind of resisting the idea of Torah, like, don't you think there's some enduring benefits in this stuff? If God is eternal and unchangeable, don't you think there's still blessings? And I was like, I don't know. I couldn't even hear it at first, but then I was like, yeah, there absolutely are. And as soon as you start to practice some of these things that we still can, you see the blessings of that. So.
If I remember correctly, it was Luke's mom who started telling him about it, and then he was kind of coming on board with it, but you were not at first.
Yeah. So. Well, at first, she said she wasn't going to celebrate Christmas, and he's a journalist, so he's like, I'm just going to research this real quick and show her that it's okay to celebrate Christmas. And he found that she had many valid points historically. And that, of course, led to see that there are holidays in the Bible where God has already given us this rich theological inheritance as his people that paint a picture of what the Messiah has done and what he has done in our lives and what he's doing with the whole body, the whole body of believers, and things that have been fulfilled and things that we're still waiting for, and all this stuff. He was like, and then he saw, as he was learning all this, that a lot of people around the world were having these same sort of epiphanies about the goodness of things that we were taught were burdensome, not necessary, or just purely cultural. I think that growing up, I had sort of an idea that that Jesus did some of the things he did just because he was culturally Jewish, and he was Jewish. And so he was in that culture. But with the Torah, he was doing those things because he was being sinless.
Right.
Because that's what it means to be sinless, not just because it was a fun tradition. Although they are fun traditions. So it's it's a little...
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, and we kind of skip over verses because I remember doing this. I mean, I remember reading things that now the Lord has opened my eyes to, how did I ever not see that in the Word? But I think we're spiritually blind until the Lord opens our eyes to different things. And it's not just Torah. We can be spiritually blind in a lot of different ways about Scripture in different ways. And a lot of times it just takes revelation from the Lord to really understand what he means by something. And I think that was especially true for me and for others I know, because I think with my husband, he's like, Lord, why don't we heal people anymore? Why aren't these miracles happen that you promised that we would do, and that we would do more than even you did here on this earth? And why can't we do them? And so in his quest for finding out why, it's we're disobedient. We're disobedient. We're not keeping his commandments. We're not keeping them all. And so, and at the same time, I'm going and learning it from a very scholarly point of view, I'm like reading, and then the Lord's just like, no, this is what I need you to do. This is what I want you to do. And so for both of us, it was just, I think, it was a revelation. This is why you're not healing people. This is why you're not really driving out demons and whatnot, because we're not obedient in our own lives, and we're not really following what he wants us to follow. And it's amazing to me, because there are so many people, when I see questions and stuff that others throw out, they really think that Jesus broke some of God's commandments because they were unimportant.
Yeah.
And as a Messiah, he couldn't do that. And like I was going to say, First John tells us that the transgression of the law is sin.
Right.
So when we really understand the meaning of sin, we understand how we sin. So, but anyway, it's been a really vocal journey for you too, and you have tons of people on your podcast that is called The Life, right? So, and I've even learned a lot from your podcast and from some of your guests like that. Your podcast is where I actually saw Jim Staley. I had never heard of him up until the time I saw him on your podcast. And it was an hour and a half long. And I'm like sitting down with my husband, like, we have to listen to this because I think this is really good. And so I rewound it and we listened to it from the beginning. But yeah, so after that, I started listening to his stuff on YouTube and his website and stuff. But yeah, I didn't know who he was until that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah. So check out her there, because you're on YouTube and
YouTube and Apple, Spotify, and Rumble. We're sometimes slow in uploading on Rumble, but we like to be there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's called The Life. And I'm sure a lot of people who listen to me probably already listen to you. So, but maybe not. But anyway, so we were going to actually talk about millennials.
Yeah.
And understanding. And I mean, every generation has their own set of issues, different things going on in the culture that affect them more personally or different than the generation before them. And you can kind of explain what you're thinking there.
Okay. Well, so a couple of weeks ago, my parents were in town, and so my mom's like, let's take the kids to the kids museum. So we were at the kids museum, like a little play, the indoor like play areas they have for kids, all these little stations. Yeah, it was like that. And normally I've had some conversations, like I've met some other moms there, but usually you're kind of like running after kids. So you don't get to like have a full drawn out thing. But it was just me and this other lady and her kid. And then mine were kind of off playing. And I just kind of like struck up a conversation with her. She's a very interesting, like facial, what do you call it? Piercings.
Okay.
I was like, does that hurt to get that? Did it make your eyes water? I just was asking her about her piercings or whatever. But she ended up telling me about her whole life and about her son and how she was no longer with her son's father and how she now lived in a different city. She was close to her ex's family, but now she lives in a different area where she didn't really have any family or support. So she was like single momming and not super close with her immediate family. And then later she talked about how she was studying psychology because as a child and as a young person, she had like mental health struggles and her therapists were helpful for her. And so she wanted to go into that kind of work. She ended up talking too about how her father was kind of, she asked me what I did. And so I mentioned the documentary and how my husband and I have been on this journey in our faith where we're trying to see what that Christians do is scriptural or something that Jesus did, and what is tradition that's been added over time through history, and have we lost things that are part of our Christian, our biblical heritage that we're not doing anymore that we should be doing, and just some of these different changes that are, that we've undergone in our faith, and how we made the documentaries of showing this journey that a lot of people are going on in their faith to try to live more like Jesus, basically. And then about the Christmas one and all that, she's like, oh, that's interesting. My dad would like it. He's really religious. And I was like, oh, what about you? What do you think about all of it? And she said, I would really like to believe in something, because without being close to my family, I lack a lot of that just guidance of decision making, and it's heavy and it's overwhelming. And so when she said that, I was like, that's interesting, because one of the things that we've discovered in this journey of our faith is these black and white principles of God's truth and his character and what he wants for us that are a litmus test that help us make decisions with more certainty that we are in his will or doing things that will be good for us, and, our family and our world, and, all of that. You get grounded in his truth, and it's comforting. And so we were able to talk about all these different things and present the gospel. It was just a crazy conversation.
Wow.
But I bring it up because several of the things she mentioned are some of the plight of millennials that are not exclusive to this generation, but I think it's happening a lot. One is just the anxiety and uncertainty. One is feeling untethered, like you're not in a community or you're lacking those deep relationships, just loneliness. Right. And the loneliness, ironically, is paired with an extreme self-focus in our generation.
That's true,
in a selfie culture. I look at these Instagram feeds sometimes, and every picture, the little squares, will be the person's face with a slightly different angle. It's
I know.
It's a million different. And I just thought, when we look back, this is going to be so interesting to look back and be like, we were just taking 10,000 pictures of ourselves and kind of trying to shape our image
and be something we're not.
Yeah, exactly. Manage how we're perceived. And then the pictures are being thumbs up and thumbs down, and that's affecting our self-esteem. And there's just all this stuff with that. So the anxiety, the loneliness, the stress. And the last thing is, I don't know how else to call this except for a manipulated sort of morality, a morality that is shaped by cancel culture.
Yes.
People wanting to virtue signal and shaming you, and toxic empathy, which is a phrase I just heard for the first time that we can talk a little bit more about if you want in a second. But a lady named Allie Beth Stuckey wrote a book about how she was writing about Christian women, but are particularly susceptible to being manipulated with empathy to compromise biblical truth. Look at this person over here. They're marginalized. They're oppressed. They need to be protected. And we need to celebrate whatever it is that they're doing because they are oppressed, that sort of thing. And that would be the loving Christian thing to do, instead of coming from a place of what's the truth of Scripture?
Right.
How does God actually define love? What does freedom look like for this person? What does, what's life look like for them? Not just how I'm moved by my feelings because the person's crying or whatever. So anyway, that little conversation with that mom, I thought, was a good microcosm of a lot of the things plaguing millennials today. And so I started to think about principles in the Torah and in the whole Bible that feel like an antidote to some of these issues.
Yeah, that's good. Right. And one thing I wanted to interject there is because we didn't really see the identity problems that people have, who they are. I think that I won't say it never existed, because certainly had my own issues growing up with being a tomboy and kind of liking being a tomboy, but I never questioned whether I was male or female. I was just a girl who was a tomboy. And then later in life, I became more feminine, if you want to say. I kind of left the tomboyish route and liked being a girl. But my point is I've never seen so much confusion with our identities as I do that kind of started, I guess maybe started is the wrong word, but that you see more in the millennials than you have seen with any other. You didn't see it in the Gen X, you didn't see it in the boomers. So that's kind of the generation where you really started seeing that confusion with who they are.
Yeah.
So I think it's a worthy conversation to have. Why? How have they? What has changed?
Yeah.
To cause this?
It's so funny because I just finished reading this book with my boys called Caddy Woodlaw, and it's like an older book about this girl who lives kind of in more pioneering times. And she is a tomboy, and her dad like has encouraged her or allowed her to kind of run the fields with the boys and do the animal stuff and, you know, all that outdoor things. And the book is a coming of age story for her. And towards the end of the book, her father kind of has this beautiful monologue about what it means to be a woman and the high call of that, that makes her heart excited to occupy that role as an adult.
Yeah.
And cool. I love that he allows her to get kind of, you know, tough and resilient. And then he says, God created women to do something so unique on the earth and to reflect his image in this way and to bring this to the party, to bring this to the table. And it's difficult work, and it's high important work, and it's wonderful to be a woman like you are. And after she heard her dad, who she respected so much, describe that her role was meaningful and purposeful from God, she was ready to like rise to the occasion. And I think that it's so beautiful because we don't get a ton of stories like that. We get a lot of child-led instead of parent-led interactions. I know that there even have been times in psychology where the idea comes up that children are blank slates and it's the parents in society who've corrupted them. So we need to get out of the way and let the child lead in their own education and in their own, you know, pursuits and stuff. And that in and of itself is unscriptural. It's like, children, obey your parents in the Lord. This is right. And all the way back to the 10 Commandments, you know? So one of the things, maybe we can just get into this now because we kind of are, but we have a lot of information. It's like information overload in the digital age. There's just everything. And that can be crippling because there's so much contradictory advice. And so let's say you have a young family or something like that, and you're hearing all these parenting experts say, if you're authoritative with your child, it's going to ruin them for life and they're going to resent you and become, you know, a hobo in the street. And you're like, I don't want to do that. And if you're not filtering that advice through the litmus test of God's word and seeing, no, like, just like our Heavenly Father in his wisdom has given us instruction for our flourishing, parents are to occupy that role for their kids. Otherwise, it's irresponsible.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to let a 3-year-old direct their life or tell you what they think they are. No, Caddy Woodlawn, you were a woman and that's wonderful. And here's why it's wonderful. And here's how you're going to have education to do it. So
exactly.
I have another example of this. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
it's okay.
There's a health podcast that I love. And if you listen to a lot of health podcasts, sometimes they'll bring on guests even back to back whose health advice is not contradicting, because they each have their own thing that they think is going to like bring healing, because maybe they healed on a carnivore diet and maybe they were vegan and maybe they were this or that. So on this podcast, she had a guest on who had done all these studies about how basically vegetables are evil and like poisonous and full of, and people talk about oxalates and all these things that can be bad for your body, and you know, and her whole thesis was like, we're eating way too much vegetables and vegetables are bad for you.
Wow.
And in the comments are all these really overwhelmed and distraught. I think her audience is mostly young, mostly young people saying like, so what do I eat? I can't even eat vegetables now. And they're like freaking out. And this is so overwhelming. I can't take all this information. What am I actually supposed to eat? And then in the comments, luckily too, there were a few believers who chimed in and said, hey, you know, yes, this lady has done research. Ultimately, as a Christian, though, in the very first chapter of the Bible, God said we can eat plants. So this one's going to have to be like a pass for me. And, you know, I'm sure that there was something valid in what she was saying. But the point is, the people who had scripture as that test were able to skip the anxiety of like, well, what can I eat? And say, actually, no. God said we can eat plants. I don't think that they're the poison that you're saying that they are.
Right.
And perhaps the problem is something else. Like I've thought about, maybe we don't prepare vegetables the way people used to do, or we don't soak our beans anymore, so they're screwing us up, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the calming effect of a hard and fast rule can't be like overstated. Knowing what you're supposed to do definitively is
Yes.
very soothing to
Oh, yeah.
anxiety. It's very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if
Absolutely.
something hard comes of the decision that you make because of that truth, you know that you're in aligned with God's will and stuff like that. And not knowing and just waiting to hear, oh, well, this influencer thinks this and this study says that. It's just this overwhelming swirl that can't help but produce anxiety to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And there are so many differing opinions. And I mean, so your husband wrote a book. I had written a Bible study, and I'll explain it this way, because every time I got a new editor or a new group, because I was in some writing groups, and so they would we would edit each other's stuff. And then you might pay for an editor, a final editor. I would get like, oh no, this chapter needs to be here. You need to switch these. You need to switch. And then the next person would switch them all back around to the way I had them originally. And it was just like, I am not asking another person to edit my book, because this is crazy. I'd have people say, okay. And these were absolute true conversations. I had one woman say, you need to get rid of all the Greek and Hebrew out of there, because I don't understand any of that. Just put it in English, because it's a Bible study. So I like to go back to the original language. Yeah. And then I was at a conference, and it was a free kind of group where you could sit and critique each other's work. And she's like, oh, I think you need more Greek in here. I think you need more Hebrew in here. And I just like,
total opposite.
Yeah. Just shut up. Just stop it. Leave me alone. But that's what would happen. And it's the same way with our health. It's no different. You can go to this doctor, you can go to this nutritionist or this counselor, and you get as many different views as you do people that you talk to. And it's really, you have to do your own research and go back to the Bible. Because like the first thing that we did and this was back in 2007, 2008, the first thing we did was got rid of pork, because we realized it wasn't good for our bodies. Yeah. We weren't even following any kind of like Torah. We weren't doing that for actually years later.
Yeah.
But yet the Lord made it clear to us that this had its own problems. We were both parasitical. We both had issues and gut issues. And it was like, okay, there must be a reason why the Lord said not to eat pig. Yeah. And maybe it has something to do with these parasites. And then we learned, yeah, it is something to do with their parasites. And so, so for us, it was going back to the Bible and learning that this is one of those things we need to give up, that we need to get out of our diet to have better health. And that's where it all started for us. But now if you bring up, like, and the church that we went to, immediately when they heard that we didn't eat pork, it was like, do you think that's going to save you? And it's like, no, we don't. No, yeah. Pig doesn't save us. Jesus saves us. And, and so it was one of those things where, immediately you were looked down on and questioned. And so I think that you really just have to believe that God knows what's best and what he created and what he calls clean, right? So it's what he calls clean that matters, not what man calls clean. So Anyway, that's a tangent, sorry.
No, that's great.
It's all this different information, and it's going back to God's word about what he says.
Yes. One way in which what you're saying, like one way in which our culture is different now than how the Bible is there are things in the Bible that God is so detailed about, like how to build the temple, how the sacrifices should be. And there's things that are a little bit more, that are less detailed, like Sabbath. It's like work. Don't work. Don't make other people work. It's a holy convocation.
Right.
Rejoice in it. Because there are people in Alaska and people in New Zealand and people in Ghana where my dad's from, and maybe the context is going to look a little bit different, but they can all do those things, and so God, the way I feel like wrote the Bible is that he gave us the detail where we need it,
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us the freedom where we need it.
Right.
You know, it's like maybe you want to journal on Sabbath, and maybe I want to like go for a walk with my kid. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, right.
You know, he's not like, you have to journal, even if you don't like to journal, you know.
Yes.
But the way our culture is that there is all the detail about everything.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what you're trying to do, there are, like you're saying, a million voices weighing in. And another thing about just the social media is that everyone kind of has a microphone. And so
and everybody thinks they're right.
Yes. So many voices. It's noisy. It's really noisy. And so
I think you really have to be strong in your faith and strong in what you know God is saying to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just really important. Before we get on social media, before we start asking other people their opinion, ask God his.
That is it. That is it. 100%. I had that exact conviction recently where it's like, are you Googling things just as a knee-jerk reaction? Like, my kid has this problem, or I have this question, or I want to know about this or that. Am I just immediately like typing it in, or am I praying about it? Mm-hmm. And how many of my expectations are just because I'm hearing so many voices saying what I should be doing, or what's worth doing, or what's good, you know? Mm-hmm. And if I stripped all that away, how am I in relation to God and what he's called me to? Because that's a lot more simple.
Right. It is. I feel sorry for my children sometimes. I think that they have it's so different than the way I grew up. The world is, and the culture is. And for me, things were just really black and white. A lot of that has been lost. And that's what we try to instill in our children. There are things that are black and white. Don't let anybody tell you they're not black and white in some cases. And so I see them struggle with friendships and people. My youngest son just wants to find a godly woman who likes to talk. I mean, really, like, he can have a conversation about scripture with her like he can me. And that she hasn't been with a dozen other guys. And he's like, Mom, I can't find that. I can't find a woman who hasn't been with other men, even in our small groups in our church. And so it's really sad. I think it's really sad. I feel badly for them. And it's so different. It's just so different now. So I'm sure you see that a lot.
It can be a challenge because you're not always with, like, when I grew up I always went to larger churches, just non-denominational or whatever. And like the church I went to growing up was 6,000 people. And now we're in this little like home group or whatever. But the nice thing is that there are, just on like the dating front, the nice thing is that there are, for some of these bigger feasts like Sukkot and things, these large gatherings. We've done Sukkot with just family in the backyard, and we've also done it with our little home fellowship, and we've also done ones where there's like 500 people, you know, and they're just so fun. There's a whole variety. And so I have definitely heard of people meeting their person at a big Sukkot when the families are all gathered, and there's people are coming from farther, you know.
Oh yeah.
There's this larger thing where they can mix and meet up with more people. And I think, it's a big task to find someone, and it's important, and it can be hard when there aren't people nearby you. But
there's
kind of have a hard.
I think there's dangerous doctrine out there that affects your age group and even the Gen Z, my children, but I think like you have those. Now, again, I'm not slamming anybody who believes this, but the doctrine of eternal security, as long as you keep that in certain parameters, that you still live a holy life, and no, you can't lose your salvation when you're living a holy life and obeying the Lord and walking with the Lord. But if we start pushing those boundaries to the point where you can do anything because you've been saved, now we're in dangerous kind of unbiblical territory. because I've seen that. And my kids run into that a lot, where it's like, Mom, they think they can do whatever they want. And there's no judgment for it. There's no consequences for it, because they've been saved. So now they can do whatever they want. And I think you can believe that, like I said, within proper parameters.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that to an extent, but I can walk away anytime I feel like walking away.
Right. Yeah.
And God's not going to stop me. And it doesn't mean that I was never saved. It means that I've become rebellious. I've chosen to walk away. But if you believe that you can't walk away, and because you were never saved, or you know what I'm talking about. But I think that can be dangerous, and I think I see a lot more of it in the churches today, in people today, of just thinking that I can do whatever I want.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And it leads to, I remember seeing, just in the church that I went to when I was like college aged, and I was living in New York, that's where I met Luke, just friends who'd be like stuck in these habitual sin loops, coming back to grace, doing it again, blah, 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 and on we go. And never any like call to just mature, be faithful to God, and stop it.
Yeah.
Because there was the idea like, oh, I can't. And also it's okay because he's so long suffering. And then God becomes this kind of like pushover, like no matter what I do, he'll always be there for me, like always be there waiting, no matter how I abuse him and how I disrespect him and how I break his law and how I walk away. And it's like, yes, God is, slow to anger and abounding in love, but it's an abuse, that doctrine.
Yeah.
I always think about the parable of the soils. In a couple of those instances, something sprung up.
Yeah.
What's that? To me, it's like somebody saying, yes, I will follow you.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't ignore. They didn't finish. It's like you have to continue. You have to continue in your faithfulness. And Luke has a chapter, I think, in the Truth book about, because the book goes through these contradictions in mainstream Christian doctrine and how seeing the Bible as a whole will solve those contradictions. And one of them is like the kind of perverted idea that nothing I do can separate me from the love of Christ. When the verse says nothing, and all the things listed are external to you, no powers, no demons, no other people, no events are going to separate you from the love of Christ. But if you say, I don't want you, God, that's a thing. And the Bible talks about that all the time. People starting out and then rejecting him. So yes, we do have that culpability, and it's, we have to finish our race and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And you just get this perverted view of God's character when you.
I mean, we like to say God is love, but God is also very just.
Yes.
Right. I mean, he is love. He's absolutely love, but don't take that for granted. Don't use that against him. In a sense.
Because then do you love him?
Yeah.
Or are you just using him? And so, we don't want to do that. We want to love him out of a sincere heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know we went off on a little tangent, but
no, that's good. It's so important. It's so important what you're saying. Okay, so I was thinking about the anxiety bit, because I do think that just so many people are, have to be medicated for it or need therapy.
Oh yeah, it's a really good point.
Can't leave their house, are afraid to interact with people, fear of the future. I think part of that has to do with what we already talked about. There's so much information. Part of it is the 24-hour news cycle, where you are not only being burdened with what's going on in your local community. Well, the ironic thing is most of the time you might not even know what's happening in your neighborhood, but you know that over in like Bangladesh, some factory collapsed and all these little children died, and now you're wrecked for the whole rest of the day. Exactly. I think the antidote to this anxiety is being comforted by the character of God. And this is something I get a lot. We read the Bible like just chapter by chapter in the morning when we eat breakfast. And when you hear a lot of these stories in the Old Testament, you see how God works. It's like we're reading Ezra, and he like worked in the heart of the king to inspire the king to let the Israelites rebuild the temple. So I'm like, okay, that's a thing he does. Right. Even if it's not a Christian ruler, he can put a desire on their heart to push his plan forward. And then later in Ezra, people are fasting and asking God for their protection and provision as they're doing that project. And it says he heard them. So I'm like, okay, hearing us is something that he does in response to us, fasting. Or, I mean, there's so many instances where you can just read these stories that happened thousands of years ago and say, and get to know God.
Yeah.
Get to know the kinds of things he does and the kinds of things that motivate him. Where it says 6 things that verse, like 7 things I hate and 6 things I can't stand. And it lists like a lying tongue and feet that are swift to shed blood. And you're getting to know him, seeing those stories. And like the whole Bible is good. And the New Testament has richness and the Old Testament has richness. But when you see how a person behaves in different I'm talking about God, but in different scenarios, you start to really understand them. And when you see his goodness, his wisdom, his heart for his people, his heart for his own glory,
right?
Then you realize that you're not at the mercy of impersonal forces. You're not at the mercy of governments or the weather. There's this whole thing about weather anxiety or of anything.
Yeah.
He really is directing things, and this is how he's working. I can't imagine just not believing that there was any God, not believing that there was a loving creator who is looking out for you, that the force with all the power also has tremendous love for you is a comfort. But when we just hear all the news and all the things, we feel at the mercy of so much.
It's all fear-based.
Yeah, and we know that we as individuals don't have the capacity to affect these things that we think are going to affect our lives. So then you're powerless. And that's scary.
Yeah.
And so I just say, come back to being grounded and comforted by God's character, by reading his word and how he moves among us.
Yeah. This is a little off the subject, but I thought it was interesting. I just heard this recently, and you brought up fear, anxiety, depression, that whole thing. But I had heard that a pregnant woman who goes on at least not just 1, but 2 rounds of antibiotics while she's pregnant leads to a child that is full of anxiety and depression. It alters the brain chemistry of the infant, the fetus at the time, but then it stays with them, that altered chemistry. Brain chemistry, I should say. And I thought that was really interesting because I know they don't recommend antibiotics when you're pregnant. And I had actually a staph infection, strep infection, which is dangerous. So they did put me on antibiotics. And that child has the most anxiety of my 3 children. And
this is reminding me of a book that I read a couple years ago because we have a son who was struggling with really bad eczema, and we got tests that let us know that he had some gut issues as well. The book was called The Mind-Gut Connection. I highly recommend. It's just only studies, basically, all these peer-reviewed studies about the link between mental and emotional disturbances and your gut flora.
Yes.
And when people talk about your a gut feeling and stuff like that, that's actually real. Basically, they did a study where they gave depressed people sauerkraut. It was something like that. And they noted feeling more positively.
Wow.
So you're right. A lot of stuff is, I don't know, this I feel like is a Torah tie-in too, because a lot of what we're finding that is healing is going back to things that people used to do, going back to simpler things, going back to pre-industrial revolution, all the foods in a box. Why people were fermenting their food to make it last longer, but in doing so, they were providing a benefit when they eat that on a regular basis.
Keeping their gut healthy.
Yeah, we have preservatives. We don't need fermented stinky stuff. But now that's causing a problem. And so we're realizing it. And so now we're making sauerkraut again. So
really good point.
That there is ancient wisdom and not just that the newest thing is the best.
Right.
I think is a biblical principle. There's that verse, go back to the ancient past. And I don't know, maybe it's find rest for your souls or something like that. But especially in Western culture that tends to be youth worship and novelty worship versus Eastern culture, or even where my dad's from in Ghana, it's you sit down and listen to the elders. Like them sharing wisdom with you is the most valuable inheritance you're going to get, basically. And I think that's scriptural too.
Oh yeah. Well, I met a man, very, very good teacher, had his master's and doctorate in, from different seminaries and whatnot. But he was a very intelligent man, but he was in his 70s. And he said when he goes around in this country, he goes, I don't really get much respect. The kids, the college age and even young married, they want somebody that's more their age. They want to listen to their age. I know younger people like that, millennials, who they just want to listen to their own peer group. But he says when he goes to China that he is revered. Like it's so different. Like they hang on his words. And so he actually, it's not that he doesn't speak in the United States, but he does a lot of his teaching to the Chinese because they actually want to hear from him. They want to listen because he's an older man and they know that he has wisdom. He has lived many years. And I think that is something we've lost. And we've had, just people even in our, that I've known over the years. It's kind of like, even I see it in my own kids, but it's more important to be with people their age, which there's nothing wrong with, nothing at all wrong with. But if it's between learning and being with people your own age that you're not going to learn from, I would always pick the group I'm going to learn from. That's just me. When I was 25, I went to a women's group because that was the only Bible study in the church. They didn't have any young groups. So I went to, and they were all married, all with kids and some with grandchildren. But I went to their Bible study. I was the youngest one there, but I still learned a lot, So I think that different generations, it becomes about your own age group is something. It's like the thing. That's who you stick with. And I find that sad sometimes. So
I think you're right. I think the segmenting of age groups is not super biblical. Like even when you have to have a healthy congregation, it's nice to have older people. It's nice to have people with older children, younger children, no children, unmarried,
right,
and children, like the whole spectrum, because you're benefiting from having that.
Yes, absolutely, you are. I even remember being in the car with my daughter and her boyfriend at the time. They were both teenagers, and she asked me to turn up a song on the radio, and it was, oh my goodness, his name is blanking, but it was one of the guys from DC Talk, Toby, whatever. And so he was on, and she's like, "Oh, Mom, turn up that song," and right away, out of the guy's mouth, he goes, "Why do you want to listen to that old man?" And he goes, "He's old." Okay, he's like 45, 40.
Crazy.
And I'm just like, do you want me to turn around and slap you? Because if I can reach you, I will. But I immediately told her later, I'm like, you know what? That has nothing to do with being a godly man, being a good person. Yeah. And I said, it is okay for you to listen to him. Do not listen to that, is what I told her. Do not listen to that. Yeah. You see that, and that's sad.
There is like a youth worship. I can't think of another way of saying it. We like to watch a lot of old movies. And one thing I've noticed is that the median age of a leading man or leading lady is much younger now. These people are like teenagers. They look so young. And back in the day, like the mom and dad would be middle-aged, and that was normal. There were more like solid adults around. Yeah. And these are people we were seeing and aspiring to instead of asking some 15-year-old what her morning routine is. It's like, well, I don't know. Absolutely.
And I have a son who loves Marvel. So he read the comics and all that. And so he loves the movies. But look at Spider-Man. When you started watching Spider-Man years ago, they were, the aunt and uncle, Aunt May was like gray with a bun on her head.
Yep.
And now she's 32. Like in the most recent ones, like Spider-Man got younger and the aunt got younger. So you had like, it was like, oh my goodness. It was just, I'm like, how much younger is Aunt May going to get? Like, how much younger can they actually make her?
That's so funny. This is actually tying in with something that we talked about earlier. When I mentioned that book, Caddie Woodlawn, and how the female, this tomboy's dad basically gave her a vision of woman worth living up to.
Mm.
In the same way, I think that when you're missing these adults, when you're missing middle-aged and older adults and grandparents and hearing their wisdom, when you don't esteem them, you don't want to be like that, so you don't listen to it. And you also fight it. It's like anti-aging is like the biggest industry ever.
Mm.
Everyone wants to look like they're still the age that they're not. Because no one, and I'm saying everyone and no one in broad sweeping terms. A lot of people are like, I'm embracing my gray hair now. But when you esteem something in your culture, then more people are apt to listen to that thing and to want to be that thing.
Yes.
But when you just rain on the parade all the time, it's like the worst thing in the world to get married or to get old or to be a stay-at-home mom or whatever. Then no one wants to do those things. And I think it can be shifted just by shifting our conversation to like more biblical estimations. Yeah. The Bible says gray hair is a crown, or whatever.
Right. I went to a functional doctor and she called herself an anti-aging. And basically she was a doctor for women who were perimenopausal or to postmenopausal. I mean, but she called herself an anti-aging doctor, and it was like, wow,
Yeah.
It's kind of sad because you know what? I mean, God blessed people with long lives. Yeah. That was a blessing.
Yeah.
It was a blessing to grow old and to be revered and respected by the younger generations because you were wise and they saw that you were blessed. Because let's face it, back in the days of the Bible, people didn't necessarily live a long time. They got sick by very simple things that we don't get sick by. We don't die from, and they did. They died from childbirth a lot. Not that doesn't happen, but, not as often. A gut infection, some kind of bacterial infection could kill you. So it was like a blessing of the Lord to grow old.
Yeah.
We were even talking one time at a lunch after our Shabbat service, and we were talking about what it means like to get older and how things change in our lives as we age. And one woman's like, okay, can we stop this? Because it sounds like I'm listening like to people in a nursing home, a geriatric convention here. And I'm just like, really? It's a shame because you can learn what to expect from people like us.
Sure,
and you don't have to be afraid because this is normal. This is how we all kind of react to the same things and as we enter into older ages and learn from it instead of looking at it like, I don't want to hear about your old age problems. I don't know. I don't think people realize how they sound sometimes when they refer to older people. So I don't think of myself as old at all because I think like I did when I was 25 about some things. Other things I'm glad I don't think like I did when I was 30 and when I was that age. My favorite age was 40 because I felt like I finally understand things better and I understand my own self better than I did when I was 20 and the insecurities that went along with all of that and even having children. I mean, I was past some of that. So yeah, I don't know. It's not a terrible thing to not be a millennial anymore or to not be 30 or not to be 35.
You're absolutely right. You're so right. We've talked a little bit about community, and we were just talking about community in terms of like being with people of all ages and the benefit of that. And I think the loneliness, I looked up some stats about this. It's some stats I found were that one survey says that 22% of millennials have no friends, 27% have no close friends, and 30% have no best friends.
Wow.
And just general research, I guess, is indicating that millennials and Gen Z have higher levels of loneliness and alienation compared to other generations. And we can see that.
I agree.
For a million different reasons. My grandparents, my mom's parents, they were like in the civic engagement club. They would dress up and go to balls. They would, he was in the military. They would play cards with their friends and have dinner parties and go to concert. It just was so social. He would, with his gardening, he would take the vegetables that he got around to all his neighbors and give them. And even until he died, he was like 92 when he died. he would go to a Wednesday morning breakfast club with all the other old guys, and they had their whole agenda of stuff they talked about. And very rooted in community, in person, face to face. And of course, they went to church and stuff too. And now I think that there's so many factors. One of them, I think, is disillusionment with people. It's like everyone in church is a hypocrite, or, and I don't want to be bothered, basically. It's easier to maintain your own stasis, your own peace when you're on your own. But when you throw other people into the mix, it is a little bit more challenging sometimes.
Yes.
You get confronted with the ugliness about yourself and the shortcomings of other people. And when you've made a practice of being alone, those conflicts seem scarier if you're not having them. You don't see how a friendship can actually be like galvanized by like that friction, where it talks about like iron sharpening iron.
It's funny because you just spoke about the selfies and being self-centered, but yet they're totally self-centered, but they're also the loneliest people because of that self-centeredness.
100%.
And it's like, stop looking around and stop looking inward and start looking at what you can do for other people and how you can be a help to other people, or even how you can bless other people.
Yeah.
Because that's going to help take away your own loneliness by concentrating and focusing on helping somebody else deal with their loneliness or their issues. And I think that's like you said earlier. I mean, that's one of this generation's biggest issues is social media and constantly seeing yourself everywhere and in every situation. And let's face it, even with Photoshop, we can Photoshop ourselves into something that we want to do that too. But it's all about looking inward constantly, and not for the right reasons, because God wants us to look inward at the problems of our heart.
Totally. There's a very pervasive lie in culture right now that you are enough and you are worthy and everything you need is within you. Look within, ask your inner higher self for guidance. It's like, you are the problem. Yeah. Jesus is the solution, and these people are going to help. So you need all those things. And
yes,
what we're missing when we have if we think, oh, if I just get my body the way I want it, if I just get the right wardrobe, this job, this boyfriend, like, then I'll feel that peace and contentment.
Right.
That the world is promising. Or if I just have people esteem me and love my Instagram posts or whatever, I will feel great about myself. But there's nothing that gives more fulfillment and purpose than being a member of something bigger than yourself and seeing how your presence or the lack of your presence makes a difference. Seeing how you can, we were just talking last week at Shabbat about how many times, because we've been sharing our testimonies, the answer to our prayers came in the form of another person doing something. It wasn't God like dropping $1 million check out of a cloud. It was like, and then this person came and helped me. They sat with me when my parent died. They did this, they did that.
Right.
And if you're extracted yourself from the community, you don't have the opportunity to be that answer to prayer.
Right.
And when the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive, it starts to feel like this Christian platitude, like you should like it better to be self-sacrificing because that's the thing to do. When really, there's basically nothing more fulfilling.
Yes.
Than knowing that your life has a purpose that's greater than just scratching your own every itch.
Absolutely.
Follow. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, he's like, I tried everything. The money, the houses, the food, the wine, the building projects, all the different stuff. Yep. He's like, that stuff is not what's going to satiate and satisfy. But in a community and just being a part of something beyond your small life is so freeing, and it allows you to wake up with such purpose. And people aren't like preaching that because, especially in the West, we're very individualized. My dad is from Ghana, and one thing they like to do is they make a lot of, like, people make their own clothes oftentimes, like they have these seamstresses and stuff, and they have all these beautiful fabrics that they've made with different prints. And they'll get a ton of fabric, and the whole family will get outfits made, like extended family, of the same print, the same fabric. And they'll walk around in public like this is our family and we're all wearing the same, like imagine like a vibrant print and you and your sons and your husband, you all have like a variation of the same fabric. In America, I feel like people would die if they had accidentally wore the same thing as someone else. That's your worst nightmare.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, we are so into our individuality. It's just not that way, I think, in a lot of other cultures, and it's not that way in the Bible. And I wanted to pull out a couple examples of how in the Old Testament we see that one body, many members principle at play, both in positive instances and in negative instances, that you're not just like a floating island on your own. I mean, things as basic as like Israel's collective redemption out of Egypt and the collective crossing of the Red Sea. When I think about Passover versus Yom Kippur, something about it always seems more like a corporate atonement, thinking about what have we done, not just my little house.
Right.
But what have we done? Because in our culture, it can feel like, well, I didn't do that. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
It's not my issue. It's not my fault. But in the Bible, when Daniel intercedes for people, we know he was righteous, but he says, God, we have sinned. We have done this. We have turned our backs. He takes it on, and he knows that it's not just...
It's plural. It's community. Plural.
Yeah. Abraham's promise, all nations of the earth, all families of the earth are going to be blessed through your seed, Yeshua. At Sinai, the covenant that they entered, they all heard those instructions and they all said, yeah, we agree. Please be our God, will be your people.
I know. I was just telling my son about that this morning, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing I thought of, which was kind of cool, I'd never thought of this before, but with the manna and the quail in the wilderness, it wasn't as though each family had to pray separately for provision. Like you and your family are like, God, we need something. And then he like gives you a little something over there. And then this family over here didn't pray. So they're just out of luck. It's like he just rained it down on Israel, period. He does these group things for the whole nation because he's caring for us as a body.
Yes.
And then, so those are some positive instances. You see it the other way too, where like when the 12 spies went into the promised land, the lack of faith, and then that rippled out onto the people, and then all of them weren't going except for the next generation, and then the other two.
And it is very Hebrew to use the words we are, us. It's very Greek to use I and me. That's the Greek mentality. It's all about me, but the Hebrew mentality is all about us as a community, us as a people, us as a family, us as a congregation. Yeah. And even we see that in our own worshiping together. The songs that we sing sometimes are about me. It's I. And those words are used instead of acting like a congregation and following Jesus' prayer, the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses. I mean, it's all about community. He didn't say, forgive me, not that we shouldn't, but it's about community. That's a very Hebrew thing, biblical.
It's a different mindset. It's definitely a different mindset. It's a brain shift, but I think it can be so healing for the millennials if we embrace community. Yeah. If we embrace seeking out people who are older than us and younger than us. I mean, sorry, this is going back to a previous point, but I was just thinking about being in a multi-generational sort of church or whatever, or assembly. You have the opportunity to be mentored and also to pass on whatever you've learned to somebody who maybe is younger or more, than you are.
Right.
But so, how in the one body, many members, that there's that concept that talks about, it's all throughout the Bible, but those words are in the New Testament. And then there's that bit that says, if your hand causes you to sin, like cut it off. And I always was thinking, because again, I'm thinking individual, especially back in the day, like, oh, if I think of a dumb example. If I can't stop looking at my phone, I should just throw it away. It's better to have that than to ignore my relationship with God. I was thinking of it only in that way. But I thought, actually, when I look at the Torah, certain sins, like witchcraft or, other ones, like somebody trying to lead you after a false god, required that member, maybe they're a hand, maybe they're an elbow, be cut off from the community. So sometimes it's about curating who's in our church, who's in your friend circle, because we are a collective. And I think we underestimate the power of like who we are associating with.
Right.
If there's a cancerous thing spiritually, we don't want that to creep in. And so that is, to me, a Torah principle. Like, we're part of a body, and also it's important what you allow in the body.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's about discernment, and it does amaze me, and I don't mean this to sound bad to everyone, because I'm definitely not trying to generalize, but I'm often amazed at the people who don't have discernment. And I know it's not necessarily a spiritual gift that's given to everyone, but the people that you somehow expect to have discernment and they don't, I think we have to really pray for discernment a lot. We have to ask that, because it's important in our spiritual lives to have discernment, and it's important in leadership to have discernment. So we really have that. I think that's just so important for leaders to have. And without it, they're going to make mistakes that affect the whole congregation or the whole community, whatever community that is for them. But I did think that we might need to end, but it's been a great conversation, and I appreciate all the just the work you put into really having a very specific topic, and to bring up this topic of millennials and bringing up their needs and how they are seen. But I have a lamb that I can hear downstairs, like really getting mad at me for not coming and getting her. She's hungry. So she's letting me know. It is funny because she's the quietest little lamb, but when she's hungry, that's what she does. She won't stop until I come and get her. Oh. So I'm sorry about that. That's all right. But it's been wonderful. I'm so glad we were able to do this one-on-one again. Not that I didn't appreciate Luke. It was fun, but it's sometimes fun just to do one-on-one with you too. So I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I hope that there can be some encouragement just to go back to the whole word, to find comfort in God's character, and to use his enduring truth as like a rooting, grounding thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your encouragement for everyone.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It was very nice to talk to you.
You too.